Hello, hello. Welcome back to another video. Today, I thought we would talk about some basic movement terms. We're gonna go through like the A to Z of fitness, but because there are too many things to talk about, we're just gonna start with the today. We're gonna go through a few terms that I thought might be useful if you're just starting out in the gym, and we're just gonna go over a few things that will be useful even if you've been at the gym for a really long time. Let's get into it. Number 1, abdominals, or better known as abs. This is super easy. They are the musculature that make up our trunk. You can see that there are a bunch of them. We've got like our serratus anterior, which is AKA the boxer's muscle. We've got external obliques, internal obliques, transverse abdominis, and probably what everybody thinks of when they think of a six-pack, we have the rectus abdominis. Our core gives us a really solid base that we need in all other aspects of our training. It's what we use to brace ourselves when we're doing heavy lifts and things like that. It helps us transfer power through our body. And even though it looks super sexy and so many of us want one, abs or abdominals are so much more than just that nice six-pack, because it does lots of important things other than look sexy. Also, just a little side note, why they call the serratus anterior the boxer's muscle is because it is involved in moving your arm and your chest forward. So it really gets defined when you punch somebody continuously. I've got a lot of energy right now in case you can't tell. Next, we have got aerobic and anaerobic. And no, these are not in alphabetical order, which makes it nice and easy for you. Aerobic and anaerobic are generally terms that we use to describe some of our energy systems in our body. We have 3 main ones. I've talked about this in detail in some of my other videos, but here's a little diagram that shows our 3 major energy systems and when they come into play. Anaerobic means without oxygen. The phosphagen and the glycolytic system are called anaerobic because they do not need oxygen or the presence of oxygen in order to function. Aerobic. Aerobic energy systems involve things like the Krebs cycle, which you might have heard in biology at school, or the electron transport system and the oxidative system. Those are all aerobic and they do require the presence of oxygen. So when you do a long, slow run, that is when we'd be getting that oxidative system working. And any time that you're using high force or high power movements or a short duration activity, that's when we're using our anaerobic energy systems. Interesting thing to note, and this is based on the science, I will fight anyone who disagrees with me. Of all of our macronutrients, carbohydrates can be metabolized for energy without the direct involvement of oxygen. Fat and protein need oxygen in order to be metabolized, but if you think that you can do high intensity sport well without carbohydrates, just go watch that video. Now the next word is agonist. An agonist is a type of muscle. It's the muscle most directly involved in bringing about a movement. It could also be called the prime mover, but we also call it the agonist. So in a bicep curl, think of the biceps brachii. It is the main muscle responsible for causing the movement. So the biceps in the bicep curl are the agonist. On the other side of things, we have the antagonist muscle. Isn't antagonist like a villain in a story? The antagonist is a muscle that slows down or stops a movement. The antagonist assists in joint stabilization and in breaking the limb towards the end of a movement. So it helps to protect our joints. They're not the bad guys at all. If we use that bicep curl example again, my favorite example just of all time. We've got the biceps being the agonist, the triceps would be the antagonist because they control and they slow down the movement of a bicep curl. Antagonist is a bad guy in the literature, right? Like, I'm not making that up. I need to find that out right now. Yeah, it is. Yeah. So those are some cool ways that we can describe our muscles, or we can describe exercises that we're doing, basing them on what the agonist is or what the antagonist is. It's also a really good reminder that you should train both sides of your body. So even if you love to bench press, make sure you do your back as well. Make sure you do pulling movements so that we're training the agonist and the antagonist. We're staying nice and balanced and we're protecting our joints. Now, the next definition that I have for you is amenorrhea. This is the most commonly discussed menstrual abnormality. It's generally defined as the absence of a menstrual cycle or a period or menses for about 3 months or more. It's relevant to fitness because of something called the female athlete triad. The female athlete triad is amenorrhea, osteoporosis, and low calorie intake, or usually an eating disorder. If we have coaches that don't know what they're doing and they overwork athletes and underfeed them, then we put our athletes at risk of developing the female athlete triad. And obviously this is something that we want to avoid, because amenorrhea is just one of the many possible things that could happen if we underfeed ourselves and we train too much. It can also be a really good indicator that you're getting something wrong in your training, or your body is not coping with the stress that you are putting on yourself. But I am not a medical professional, so if something like this is happening to you, please make sure to check with one of them. The next definition, or the next term, are adductors. Adduction means that you are moving a limb towards the midline of your body. Now, our adductors are these parts, our inner thighs, and they are responsible for moving our legs back to the midline of our body. We also have abductors, or abduction, which means moving away from the midline of your body. The reason I wanted to talk about adductors, or that inner thigh musculature, is because it often gets really left behind in training programs. People train your abductors, or the things that move your legs out, because they're our glutes and everybody wants a nice perky booty. But adductors are just not that sexy, so they often get left behind. And they deserve a little TLC, just like every other part of our body. With our adductors, here's a little diagram. We have the pectineus, we have the adductor longus, the adductor brevis, and my personal favorite, we have the gracilis. So we can train our adductors by using adduction seated machines, or we could use cables, or we could do something like a Copenhagen plank. So please make sure not to forget them, because they need some love as well. The next one that you may have heard before is AMRAP, A-M-R-A-P. AMRAP is a very fun one. It just means as many reps as possible. So you're going for the maximum amount of repetitions that you can possibly achieve. That is AMRAP. Pretty popular in CrossFit. So if you've done CrossFit, you might have seen that one before. Now the next term is agility. I'm sure we have all heard this, but contrary to popular belief, agility is not just when people change direction when they're running. That would be change of direction. Agility is actually a combination of many different factors. Most importantly, in order for something to test our ability or to improve our ability, it has to include large amounts of uncertainty. So we need to be reacting to something. We need to react to things like the opponent or a ball. That's what distinguishes agility from change of direction tasks. Anything that restricts our time or the space that we have available is also a really good way of developing our agility. If you have a quick look at this video, this would just be change of direction, because the athlete knows what's coming, it's planned. This, when we add in reacting to an opponent, that is agility. There needs to be some sort of perceptual cognitive aspect to it in order for it to classify as agility. Things like small-sided games or even simple reaction drills can be a great way of starting to develop your agility. The next term I have for you is anabolic. Anabolic is a term that is used to help us describe things that create muscle. Anabolism, we're gonna go with, is a building up process that creates larger molecules from smaller molecules. And this is how we make muscle from the food that we eat. It's also why anabolic steroids or performance enhancing drugs are called what they're called, because they help that building up process significantly, hence anabolic. There also used to be that old fitness trend that used to go around where you had to eat protein immediately after you finished working out, otherwise you'd miss your anabolic window. And that's not really a thing. The next term I have for you is anterior. Anterior is an anatomy word, and it helps us to describe a place on the body. It means in front. So some muscles have anterior in their name, like the tibialis anterior, which is our shin on the front, or the serratus anterior, like I mentioned, that boxing muscle, because it wraps around on the front. So anterior means in front of, or in front relative to something else. Nice and easy. The next one is axial. We all know about our skeleton. Did you know that our skeleton is split up into two major descriptors? We have the axial skeleton, which makes up the bones in our head, neck, back, and chest. You may have heard coaches say axial loading, and this means when we load up that axial skeleton. So if you think of anything where we'd put that load directly on our back, so think of things like a barbell back squat, anything where that weight is going straight through, loading up that spine. That would be axial loading. The other part of our skeleton, also an A word, is the appendicular skeleton. And that's everything else. It's called appendicular because the remaining bones append or attach to our axial skeleton. And the last word that I wanted to talk to you guys about is arousal. And I know what you're thinking. Very sexy. No, we're not talking about sexy arousal, unfortunately. Although, it would be a great A word. I mean, there are a few other sexy A words that I'm sure we could think of. But arousal is a blend of psychological and physiological activation. It refers to the intensity of motivation at any given moment. If you are psyched up for an event and you are pumped, ready to go, you are said to be highly aroused. If you aren't activated enough, or you're bored, or you're experiencing wandering thoughts, you're just not in the moment, then you would have low arousal. There is an inverted U theory of arousal, which means that the optimal level of arousal is somewhere in the middle. If we're too psyched up, then we don't perform well. But if we're not psyched up enough, we also don't perform well. So we have to find that sweet spot in the middle. And that's gonna be really individual. I mean, it's different for extroverts and introverts. It's gonna be different for everybody. And those, my darling friends, those are the A words that I have come up with today. If you find or think of any A words that I've missed, then drop them down below. But that is it from me today, guys. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week ahead, and I will see you all next time. Ciao.